Guess you will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening, it's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. O'Sullivan's Law is at it again. All organisations that are not explicitly right-wing will, over time, become left-wing. This time, and not for the first time, it involves our courts, specifically the Magistrates Association, issuing a style guide for inclusive language. Make no mistake, anyone who wants to change language is political and possibly even authoritarian. If we have learned anything from the debanking scandal, it is that there is nothing either diverse or inclusive about diversity and inclusion. Senior government figures, including an unnamed cabinet minister, have reportedly warned the Prime Minister that the Conservatives must campaign to lead the European Court of Human Rights at the next election, if the court continues to block deportation flights to Rwanda. Could we be looking at a Brexit 2.0 in 2024? But as we showed over prisoner voting rights, Parliament is always and remains in the meantime free to override the ECHR's rulings. Now, you probably are very familiar with dukes, marquises, viscounts and barons, but we will be joined by Somerset's favourite baronet. The system was introduced by James I as a means of raising money, and the legacy of the practice continues to grace God's own county through Sir Benjamin Slade, the 7th baronet, who we will be hearing from shortly. Plus, the State of the Nation from Somerset's denouement, William Sitwell, will be teaching me how to perform the seemingly impossible task of cooking the great British culinary phenomenon of Kippers, smoked Scottish herring, but only after we exclusively reveal the story behind it involving a certain former Prime Minister coming to my London home after he kippered the EU in a speech. State of the Nation starts now. As always, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. We've got a special reader of the mailmogs later. Now it's time for the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you. Well, we start with some breaking news this hour here on GB News from Surrey Police. They have begun a murder investigation after, we understand, a 10-year-old girl was found dead inside a property in Woking in Surrey. Officers were called to an address in Hammond Road in Woking at around 3 o'clock this morning, following a tip-off for a concern for safety. That's all the details we have on this at the moment. We'll bring you more as it comes to us. Well, our other main story on GB News this evening, the Police Service of Northern Ireland says dissident Republicans claim now to be in possession of officers' details following an industrial-scale data leak. The PSNI mistakenly shared members' details, 10,000 of them, on Tuesday. A group set up to assess the risk to officers caused by the breach has already had 500 referrals. Chief Constable Simon Byrne says he is deeply sorry.
An early worst-case scenario that we have been dealing with is that third parties would attempt to get this data to intimidate, corrupt or indeed cause harm to our officers and staff. We are now aware that dissident Republicans claim to be in possession of some of this information circulating on WhatsApp, and as we speak we are advising officers and staff about how to deal with that and any further risk that they face.
Now, 100,000 illegal migrants have crossed the English Channel since 2018. That landmark figure was reached today as another 11 dinghies carrying another 550 people were intercepted attempting to cross the Channel illegally today. In a statement, the Home Office said the unacceptable number of people making these dangerous crossings is also placing an unprecedented strain on our asylum system. And the number of people waiting to start routine hospital treatment in England has reached a new record high. NHS England found over 7.5 million people were waiting to start treatment. That's at the end of June, and it's also the highest number since 2007. Cutting waiting lists is another of Rishi Sunak's key priorities for 2023. In Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon has been defending her government's use of taxpayers' money for travel upgrades. Scotland's former First Minister says the spending probably totalled less than just one flight taken by the Prime Minister. £10,000 was spent in 3 years on VIP airport upgrades in newly released information. Her successor, Humza Yousaf, has ordered a review. The high street chain Wilko has collapsed today. The company's appointed administrators after falling into administration after failing to secure a rescue deal, putting around 12,000 jobs at risk. The chain has 400 stores right across the UK. And lastly, Virgin Galactic has completed its first space tourism flight, sending 3 passengers to the edge of space. The passengers enjoyed weightlessness, we understand, for around 5 minutes of the trip, as the VSS Unity reached 85 kilometres above the Earth. Richard Branson's company joins Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin and Elon Musk's SpaceX in the fledgling space tourism business. You with GB News across the UK on your TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
O'Sullivan's law states that all organisations that are not explicitly right-wing will become left-wing. This is embodied by the recent case of the Magistrates Association, self-proclaimed independent voice of the magistracy. This supposedly apolitical group has issued an inclusive language style guide which includes the following: use chair instead of chairman, police officer instead of policeman, spokesperson, or dreadful word, instead of spokesman. Goes on some rather odd examples, such as a person with disability, not a disabled person, a wheelchair user, not a person confined to a wheelchair, lives with or has, not suffers from, a particular condition, died by rather than committed suicide, someone with mental health. They surely all of us have mental health of some degree, rather than somebody who is mentally ill. And just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, it advocates limiting the use of Latin where possible, such as replacing ad infinitum with endlessly. This is very odd because lots of Latin terms have entered our language. Do they ban the word data, for example? Anyway, the Magistrates Association has responded to this backlash rather boldly, saying we make no apology for using inclusive language. But language and politics are inextricably linked and interwoven. The diversity and inclusion agenda has been used by the left to promote its worldview. And it's not just language, it's opinion that flows from the language. And this was shown by the Farage debanking scandal. Diversity inclusion was used to enforce a set of metropolitan views. The opinions of Nigel on Europe, on climate change and immigration were questioned because they didn't fit in with the diversity and immigration approved views, diversity and inclusion approved views. And it's not about equal opportunities, which is what one thought it was about in the beginning. And the ideology which pretends to be above politics isn't, it is political. Because the ideas they express aren't above contention. They include things like critical race theory, and they become expressions of ethical practice rather than the truth that you want to have equality of people's opportunity and positioning within the state. And Nigel covered in his programme earlier, revealing the agenda pursued by NatWest of racial and gender quotas. This is what it leads to. You set the language and then the policies flow, even though such policies run in direct contradiction to our traditions of meritocracy. They are contentious and they are part of a radical political ideology. And this isn't new. Language has always been at the heart of power. After Norman Conquest, there was a division in language between ruler and ruled. And we see this in the words we still use today. So beef is from the French and was what the rulers, the Normans, were eating, while cow is from the Anglo-Saxons and it's what the Anglo-Saxons peasant was tending. You see that power dynamic, beef for the powerful, cow for the weak. Language is an expression of power, and it's been used by the left to control the way organisations think. It's an effort to wire their ideology into our institutions. Now, the Magistrates Association may not be bright enough to realise how political it is being, but it has become an advocate for a hard left political ideology. Its ideological nature is also exposed by the fact that it's ignorant. It shows up as being political because they don't know the history of our language. So, in the Germanic languages, man means person first and also then means male. Interestingly, in Anglo-Saxon, from which English is of course in part derived, wermon and whiffmon were male and female. The where in mon is commonly dropped. The whiff has become woe, so woman. And the suffix mon, or man in more modern usage, does not imply male. So chairman does not imply a man. Policeman does not imply a man. Once again, inclusion is used as a pretext to try and tell us what to think. And the magistracy, like all our judicial outlets, ought to be apolitical and use the language of everyday life. It ought not to be a mouthpiece of the ideologues in the Labour Party. As always, I want to know your thoughts. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm now delighted to be joined by the human rights lawyer, David Haig. David, thank you for joining me. Do you agree with me that language is fundamentally important and cannot be disassociated from politics?
Absolutely, I do, Jacob. And I think, as a lot of your viewers may or may not know, the Magistrates Court is incredibly important in the administration of justice. They look after maybe 90% of criminal cases as well as family cases. So this is very important. It's not an unimportant issue. And of course, we already, I think we all want a judiciary that doesn't discriminate people against people on the grounds of things like disability or sex or age. And of course, we already have legislation that helps protect that. Now, what we've seen obviously is now that the Magistrates Association trying to bring in new language, which you've described very, very well. And from a human rights perspective, like I said, it's very admirable that we stop discrimination in courts, and there may well be some, but do we want to go that extra level and put another burden on already overworked magistrates courts, worrying about whether or not to call someone a chairperson or a chairwoman?
Because I think what you say is so important, that we all want to have absolute confidence that our courts are impartial and that they don't discriminate against anybody, because as soon as you start discriminating, you may find the innocent guilty, and that's the worst aspect of any form of legal system, if the innocent are found guilty. And so what worries me is that this politicises it and brings in something that has become an ideology of the left into something that ought to be apolitical.
Well, absolutely, and I think that's the key. We already have legislation, as you well know, that actually talks about equality and diversity. and sets laws which apply to courts as well. For instance, covers things like mental health and the need to make reasonable adjustment on the judiciary in cases of mental health and other disabilities. So with the Magistrates Association effectively putting in place additional language and additional requirements that's over and above what's already there in legislation, I think it's unnecessary, it's confusing, and as you say, it's political.
And it's certainly confusing because even the Magistrates Association has had to try and clarify what it meant, because it's pretending that this isn't for magistrates, it's just for volunteers within the Magistrates Association. But that seems to me a bit of an ex post facto explanation.
Well, absolutely. I mean, why then issue that? Why then issue that? Why make it public? The Magistrates Association is to look after effectively magistrates as well as you mentioned, their supporters. Now, if that was the case at the time, why not make that clear? And as people have said, and why we're having this discussion, it is confusing. And like I said, the magistrates are incredibly important in the administration of justice. They're already, I would imagine, very much overworked and somewhat under-resourced in terms of the actual court buildings and the administration of it. So I think there's a lot more focus that should be have on the actual administration of the justice and resources we can give to the magistrates than this.
And isn't it fair to say this is an unusual mistake by the Magistrates Association, which is broadly a good organisation to try and help magistrates do their job better, and that's a valuable role and you want an organisation that does something like that?
I think it's a very valuable role, and the magistrates are something I think as we as Brits can be very proud of. Particularly when we look at gone are the days when you see 70-odd-year-old white male as a magistrate. You have a very diverse set of magistrates now across the country, and that's something that we can be very, very proud of. There are other areas in the judiciary that needs to be addressed, and perhaps it's obviously not the job of the Magistrates Association, but we should be focusing on areas in the judiciary that are not representative of the country, whereas I think certainly the magistrates are.
And the magistrates have evolved to become more representative of the country as a whole over the last 20 or 30 years. It didn't happen overnight, but it evolved. And this is perhaps my key point, that language should evolve rather than being changed by edict.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, as the country, the makeup of the country and things have changed in laws, and the magistrates have slowly evolved. Now, from when I trained as a solicitor some time ago to now, there's been a lot of changes. And like I said, you go and see magistrates now up and down the country, and they are no longer 60 or 70-year-old white men. You have a good representation of all sorts of people that make up Britain, and that's, like I said, something to be proud of. But that, as you say, has evolved over time. It wasn't a written note or a memorandum from one association to change overnight.
And what importance would you attach to the Magistrates Association advocating for diversity and inclusion as a general rule rather than in this specific document?
I think as a general rule, it's something positive, but they should apply the law as it exists and not try and go beyond that. We already have, as I mentioned, the Equality Act and other legislation that covers discrimination and how to address people, etc. So let's stick to the laws rather than go over and above that until those laws are changed. Now, if the laws are changed, then let's follow them, but let's not go beyond that. And I think it causes confusion for everyone when you do that.
Well, thank you very much, David. The Magistrates Association has issued a statement, and it said, "Our style guide is a resource that we, like many other organisations, have available to our staff and volunteers to ensure consistent use of the English language. It would be for the Judicial Office and not us, as has been erroneously suggested in the media, to issue formal guidance to magistrates on the topic." Well, thank you to the Magistrates Association for that. We did ask them to put forward a spokesman, but they declined. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. Coming up, is it time to leave the European Court of Human Rights? Plus, don't forget about the Kippers.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it. Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Steve, very pithily, Steve, diversity equals division. And Rob, which sounds the best for the country to be, A or B? A, diverse, definition, unalike, people with diverse interests, composed of distinct or unlike elements or qualities at odds with each other, or B, integration, definition, the action or process of successfully joining or mixing with a different group of people. When did everything diverse take over from integrating? And I think that's really important, Rob. I think you hit the nail on the head, actually. The success of this nation has been in integrating people as they have come here and being a whole. I did the piece about West Hertfordshire yesterday, and West Hertfordshire is a community, and community is about coming together, and it's been the success of the melting pot idea in the United States. So I rather agree with you. But once you put people in groups and blocks, you're deliberately causing division. And I think the left do that because they think it gives them electoral support. A number of reports over the past 24 hours have suggested that senior politicians and advisers close to the Prime Minister have suggested that campaigning to leave the European Court of Human Rights at the next election may be the only viable solution to solving the small boats crisis. And you will have noticed on the news 100,000 have been reached today, migrants, over the last 5 years since the small boats started coming. The Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, said recently that the government would do whatever it takes to tackle the numbers. The usual suspects expressed their confected horror at the thought of such a policy, the sort of people who think that without the ECHR, we behave in the way our co-signatory Russia does, which of course behaves so well as a member, in spite of its repeated violations. But as we've discussed before on this programme, not only do we get our rights from Parliament, from democracy, the ECHR is a quasi-political body with its judges nominated by politicians in the member states of the Council of Europe, and not all being judges in our understanding of them. It's a deeply flawed institution. In the meantime, were such a question to arise of a difference between us and the court, the best thing for Parliament to do is to use its normal powers to override the court, as we did in the case of prisoner voting rights. Well, I'm joined now by an MP and former member of the European Parliament as well, and Somerset neighbour, and Neil Parish. Neil, do you think the time has come for us to say, look, we've left the EU, it makes no sense to belong to the ECHR as well, even though they're distinct bodies?
Yes, I mean, I think we always need a check and balance, but that can be done by our own Supreme Court. And so, therefore, I think legislation would need to be passed to make sure that cases weren't taken anymore to the European Court of Human Rights. So I think let's do it. But of course, we need to put it in a manifesto because it would not go through the House of Lords, as you know, Jacob. They would block it. So therefore, if it put in a manifesto for the next election, if we were to win, if the Conservatives were to win that election, then they have every chance of putting it forward.
Do you think it would get through the House of Commons at the moment? Because many of our fellow Conservatives would be strongly opposed to this.
I don't think it would go through the House of Commons at the moment, no, but I think what I think everybody is upset about is just the numbers of people are coming. I know Robert Jenrick was on the radio yesterday. They're doing a deal with Turkey, which is a great help.
Because I think a lot of the boats and engines are made in Turkey, and I think if we can actually do agreements. So, I mean, I think the whole idea, and I'm really excited too, it's a bit beyond the remit, but of the trade deal with India, finally we are getting somewhere. This is a good deal. So I think we should take advantage and actually, I voted Remain, you voted Brexit, but I think the issue for me now is that we've left the EU, let's actually have our own laws. And why do we, I used to sit in the European Parliament, and it used to amuse me really. I had a very sceptical electorate, but when they lost a case here, they would want to take it to the European Court, and I used to more or less say to them, well, I thought you didn't believe in the European Union actually sort of dominating our court system, but people still did.
On the arguments for staying in the ECHR, because I think there are still those in the Tory party who are strongly supportive of it. So the first is that we wrote it. Lord Kilmuir, the Lord Chancellor in the 1960s, was the main author of it, a Conservative figure. It was a product of UK jurisprudence, and it was about setting countries a standard that they should aspire to after the horrors of the Second World War. Isn't there some nobility in that?
There is, but of course you alluded to the fact when you introduced this that the member states will decide who the judges are that go forward, and of course we can call them difficult liberal judges, we can call them what we like, but there are a very mixed bag of judges, and so therefore wouldn't it actually be better to have our own? I mean, I think we have to, in the end, you have to expect a check and balance, don't you? Politics, however keen you and I might be on it, there does have to be a judiciary. But what I don't want to see is a judiciary just overruling Parliament all of the time, because our public out there are really fed up. They want us to help those that genuinely need to seek asylum, but a lot of these are economic migrants that are coming, and I think this is where I think people are getting so upset. And then if the court interferes, then why should they? I think that's people's view.
I'm a great advocate of the Dyson concept of parliamentary sovereignty, and that if you don't like the Parliament, you change it at the next election. But it does make us a very unusual country in this respect, that the United States has its Supreme Court. Almost every other country has a Supreme Court that can say, no, Parliament, you have gone too far. We don't. Do you think we miss something by not having that protection of certain absolutely basic and fundamental rights?
Yeah, I think if you were to leave the ECHR, then I think you'd have to put a structure in place. But you'd have to be careful how you put that in, because you might create, dare I say it, another monster. And so when you put a check and balance in place, it's got to be reasonable and reasoned, and also actually believe that the Parliament of the day, as you quite rightly, should have its way. And then the electorate after that can decide. And so, but of course, if a government does go too far, it might be left as well as right, then it does have to be, there has to be a balance.
Well, Dicey himself, after the 1911 Parliament Act, came to the conclusion that the best check on the House of Commons was actually a referendum, and that the House of Commons should not be able to upend the Constitution without getting specific approval from the electorate. That's something I'm quite attracted by, even after our experience of 2016. Do you think that is an answer, so that you embed any constitutional change in democracy rather than in a judiciary?
I think referenda is okay if you can actually don't make the arguments too complex, and so therefore I don't think you can use it for everything, and so therefore I think you will still need a legal check. Because I think some things will just very difficult, and also, as you well know, to actually organise a full-scale referendum in this country takes some doing, and it's not going to happen on every issue, is it?
It's quite an effort, but the electorate voted on the alternative vote, on the voting system, and that was quite complex, but they cut through the chase on that and realised it was just a scheme to keep the Lib Dems in power forever. They clearly understood the Brexit referendum. That
PR in it, and the dog, the tail wails, wags the dog. That's the problem with the whole thing, and I think that's where if you are a small party, you always want proportional representation. If you're a large party, you don't. You do, definitely.
But referendums could be part of the solution.
It could be, but like I said, we'd have to get more, perhaps the Swiss style, where you link it to other elections so that you can actually do it at the same time, get the turnout, and make sure it's done properly. Otherwise, you get very low turnouts, and would you then have the result that would it be legitimate?
Well, thank you very much, Neil. Thank you very much for joining me. Oh, coming up, what is a baronet? Plus, are you a fan of smoked Scottish herring? Thank you very much. That's great.
Pleasure.
Hello there, welcome to your latest broadcast for GB News. I'm Greg Dewhurst. We're going to see increasing risk of showers as we move towards the weekend, but there will be some sunny spells, just turning a little cooler too. If we look at the bigger picture, this area of low pressure moves in another area of low pressure for the weekend, bringing the risk of showers, though not as windy as recent weekends. For this evening, it's been fine end of the day for many, but we do have this area of rain pushing north and eastwards. It could be heavier for a time across Northern Ireland as it crosses into Scotland too. Elsewhere, generally quite a cloudy, warm, muggy night to come. A lot of cloud around, some drizzle over the hills. Temperatures remaining in double figures, 17, 18 degrees as a low for some of us. A bit of a cloudy start to Friday, still some rain across Scotland, heavy at times, pushing away northeastwards, and then slowly through the morning it starts to brighten up. We could see this area of cloud push into southeast England though to give some showery rain for the afternoon. Elsewhere, bright afternoon, sunny spells and scattered showers, turning breezy around western coast, making it feel a little cooler here. Still highs reaching 27 degrees towards East Anglia. And then Saturday, this low approaches us, gives spells of rain across the north and the west of the UK as the winds pick up. Best of the drier, brighter weather holding on towards the southeast, but even here we'll see some showers moving in later on in the day, and quite blustery. Temperatures a little cooler too, and that continues into Sunday and Monday with further showers and temperatures a little below average.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Robin says, we haven't got time to put it in any manifesto. We need to deal with it now. The people of this country are sick to death of this procrastination by the government and want action. Robin, I don't disagree, but there just, in my view, isn't a majority in the House of Commons. There are enough Conservative MPs who would vote against it at this stage that I don't think you could get it through, and you need a mandate from the British people to whom we are all answerable. Nicola says, as I understand it, the government could relatively easily disapply the ECHR in relation to immigration policy, like it did in the case of prisoner voting. Is that not correct? Yes, that's my view, actually. I think that you can disapply individual items and then have a discussion, as we did over prisoner voting rights. Anyway, the British peerage system is beautifully complex, but the hierarchy of dukes, marquises, earls, viscounts and barons may be the limit of the nobility, but not of titles. Created by James I in 1611 was the concept of the baronet, the only hereditary title not to be included in the peerage. It is in effect an hereditary knighthood, and King James set them up as a means of funding the crown. The tariff started off at £1,000 and then got cut because he sold too many. Whilst modern prime ministers may be accused of cronyism with respect to knighthoods and peerages, this phenomenon is nothing new. Liberal Prime Minister David Lloyd George made his party and private office a lot of money by selling peerages, baronetcies and knighthoods for £50,000, £30,000 and £10,000 respectively, prompting the Honours Prevention of Abuses Act of 1925. But these constitutional quirks still exist today, and they're one of the glories of our nation. One of GB News' very own most senior and competent producers became a lord in the past few years after being given about 10 square feet of land in Orkney. So he's clearly hoping that the island doesn't leave the United Kingdom. Anyway, I'm joined now by Sir Benjamin Slade, Somerset's best-known baronet, and Sir Benjamin definitely didn't buy his baronetcy because it was awarded, he's the 7th baronet, to a distinguished ancestor for his service in the Peninsular War. So tell me, what is a baronet? What responsibility does it give you? And does it open any doors?
It's a small baron. In other words, you're not a baron, but you're sort of like a sergeant major. I wish I was further up. I wish I was a general, but I'm not. And so it doesn't give you any responsibilities. We get to wear a badge, and that's about it. But it does help with Americans.
It impresses Americans.
Oh, they love that sort of thing, yeah.
And as a baronet, you've been a very high-profile one, mainly because you've kept on advertising for a wife, because you want to have an heir. You've got a daughter. Do you think baronetcies should be able to go through the female line and other titles?
I don't actually. Some Scottish ones actually do go through the female line. I can't remember them. But my daughter's illegitimate, but there might be more on the way, and you never know. I'm dating at the moment.
But you're still advertising for a wife?
I don't advertise. I just put in I needed a lady of the house because the last one had run off with the handyman. I was looking for a new handyman, and I put that on the website, and it went viral around the world, and everybody from Africa, India and South America applied. And then I had to limit it to people who could fly helicopters, had driving licenses, and didn't read The Guardian, no Guardian readers and things like that. So I always got 2 columns in The Guardian for that, you know.
So there could be a GB News viewer, because that would be politically much more sympathetic, who would be entirely suitable. So applications to you in Somerset.
Yes, I think it's on the website. They've got to be castle trained. A little bit of accountancy, a little bit of legal work would be helpful. A little bit of private income would be very useful. A large fortune would be more useful.
And no cats?
No, my ex-wife had 17 cats. 2 of them were tomcats, and it's the only divorce in British legal history where the tomcat was cited as the co-respondent. Luckily, the judge didn't like cats.
So that was all dealt with. So in your community, in the Somerset community, do you feel a sense of responsibility to the people in your part of Somerset as a baronet, or would that be a responsibility you would have regardless?
I don't think I have any responsibility in our part of Somerset. I just like to have fun and make a few quid, which making a few quid has been avoiding me for the last few years, but I'm doing my best.
And in your part of Somerset, there are some really interesting developments going on, that the electric battery plant is going to happen. You're not a million miles away from Hinkley Point. It's a part of the county that's really doing very well.
I have to say that Bridgewater is the epicentre. Not only does it have the biggest development in the whole of Europe, which is Hinkley Point Power Station, which is still progressing, but also we have this new battery factory, which is going to be one of the biggest buildings in Europe, which is Jaguar Tata. And this has affected me. I'm out of doing weddings now. The fire officer shut me down. I've got to spend a fortune on having all the bedrooms have got to have fire escapes running out of them and things like that, so it's a bit boring. And the electricity company, the bill got to 102,000 in lockdown, and it was too much, so they've cut me off, and I'm running on a generator at the moment. So, but I am looking to lease the house out to executives.
And do we need more house building to provide the houses for the people who are going to be working in these areas? Because I know you've got strong views on house design.
I think there should be more beautiful houses in areas. They must release the land, but there is another problem. There's access to the electricity to be able to lock in to the supply of electricity, and we have a big problem at the moment that you can't necessarily do whatever you want to do because there isn't the power, and you can't draw down without that, and we have a serious problem.
But Hinkley Point will help with that, because it will provide a major power source, and particularly if you're nearby, surely it'll be possible to get the electricity. And that's one of the reasons the car battery plant is going there, because it's a source of guaranteed secure power.
We are 8 times more expensive than India and China, and however the government has given them a good slug of money or some huge subsidy to make it viable. But in actual fact, what we really do, if we're going to prosper, is have cheap electricity. Look, if a local shop up the road is spending £56,000 a year on electricity, it's just ridiculous.
Well, this has been a constant theme of this programme, that we cannot get to net zero by making people cold and poor. And you were saying it costs £102,000 to heat your house.
They actually fiddled the meters. I actually argued with them, and we changed the meters, and we got it down to 62,000, but it's still rather a lot of money.
And how's your generator working? Is that an efficient way, or is that a polluting way of getting power?
The generator is probably polluting, but it's running at about £3,000 to £4,000 a year, based on diesel, and which is a lot easier at the moment. However, I don't see how businesses can pay all this amount of money. We must concentrate not so much on asylum seekers, which is a blind, but we've got to concentrate on people heating their houses. Otherwise, every fish and chip shop north of Watford can't get any fish. They can't get the oil that comes from the Ukraine, and we can't heat. There's VAT. There's all these zero taxes on the heating, and I think we've got to stop that.
Well, thank you, Benji. We need to end where we started. What happens to your title if one of our viewers doesn't get in touch as a suitable person to provide the heir to the Slade baronetcy?
Unfortunately, it all dies out, and I desperately need a wife to run
because the Peninsula man had 11 sons. Yeah. Has that all died out? There's no route through?
They've all died in battle. There is no male heir. So we've got to have male heirs, and we've got to get on with it. And also, the wife must have some brain cells, because I haven't got any, and we'd like to inherit them. And they could run the empire, because, as Jane Austen said, anybody with a big house, and I've got 2 of them, you needs a wife fast.
Well, Benji, that's absolutely brilliant. It's very useful to know precisely who a baronet is, what he has to do, but that he doesn't have an enormous amount of responsibilities, but needs somebody to help him run his house. Coming up after the break, we'll be standing up with Sitwell.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your male Moggs, and having had Peter and Thomas and Anselm read them, Alfred was absolutely determined to join in the fun. So, Alfred.
Jim says, great show, Jacob. Are you enjoying, quote-unquote, working from home?
Well, Jim, yes, I am, and I've got a fantastic team who've come down here. I've done such a good job, worked very hard to make everything happen. But it's been nice to be with my children for the week. Have we got another one as well, Alfred?
Rachel Boycott says, Dear Jacob, big fan of yours, but please stand corrected. We all know the county of Yorkshire is God's own county and not Somerset.
Well, my goodness, that is such a compliment. That is Lady Boycott, Sir Geoffrey Boycott's wife. I cannot tell you how flattered I am that you're watching the programme, and I'm very nervous to say that I still disagree with you. Somerset is God's own county, though my mother-in-law, Helena's mother, may be on your side. As I said before the break, earlier in the week we had the latest edition of the commercial success known as Sit Down with Sitwell. But what we didn't tell you is that earlier we did a bit of standing too. Indeed, some standing in a part of my house which I can't pretend I use all that often, the kitchen. Why, you may ask? Well, it was a few years ago now when the great Alexander Boris Johnson and I met after a busy day of Brexit leadership campaigning, actually. Boris had been indefatigably waving kippers at a hustings meeting in an attempt to remind the public that Brexit had all sorts of benefits to help unleash Britain's latent herring industry. He was, of course, as usual, fully vindicated, as Britain's herring industry is now stronger than ever. But this isn't just a fishy tale, because I'd actually eaten Boris's dinner, having spoken for him at an event that he was meant to do but couldn't because he was doing the hustings. When he came to my house, he realised he was a bit peckish. The family were all in Somerset for the school holidays. There wasn't a lot of food around. All that was left were the kippers. So after a rummage through the kitchen to find the necessary utensils, Boris did the honours and fried up those kippers that he'd been waving about a few hours earlier. I'm not sure how fresh they were because the house stank for a few days afterwards. But I asked William how he would do it, how he would cook them perhaps less smellily, and in a selfless act of charity, William Sitwell taught me how to complete this impossible task earlier in the week.
Now, Jacob, I know that this is your house, but this is a room you may not have been in. This is a kitchen.
Well, I come in here occasionally, make the odd cup of coffee, or have a bowlful of biscuits, keep myself fed.
Okay. When you finish the cup of coffee, do you bring it back here, or does it linger in another part of the house?
Well, I have a nasty feeling if you went around the house, you might find quite a few coffee cups in different places hidden away.
Okay. Do you know where the dishwasher is?
No, I don't.
There's a sink there where
excellent.
you can
It's all
wash
very,
up a cup
very
of
useful.
coffee.
But, as I think I may have told you before, as I'm entering into my anecdotage, during Boris's leadership campaign, he had been waving around some kippers as some great Brexit advantage.
That's why you've got kippers.
Not these ones, they'd have gone a bit off by now. And we met up because I'd done an event for him, and he came round to my house in Cowley Street and was a bit peckish because he'd missed his tucker and therefore cooked these kippers. And it seemed to me an immeasurably complicated thing. We searched every cupboard to find something to put it in and get the right equipment, and then he fried them up. But you apparently think this is all very easy.
Well, the art of cooking kippers is quite simple, and I'll discuss that in a minute. Of course, the important thing about the kipper, like all food, is the provenance. Make sure you buy, good fish from a good source. They should be fresh.
Have a good fish sauce. I read your absolutely gripping restaurant reviews in all sorts of fancy places you go to, and I think, well, that would give me indigestion just to look at it.
Well, some of them I do get indigestion, so I have to be careful. Vegetables, I mean, a pea or a carrot, does that ever pass your lips?
No, I don't like peas or carrots. I like runner beans.
Okay, cabbage?
Cabbage, all right, yes, go with cabbage.
So cavolo nero, maybe you might have, yeah?
Translate it for me.
Kind of, it's a brassica, it's a type of cabbage.
Oh, is it?
A sprout at Christmas?
I like Brussels sprouts.
Okay.
Yes.
So listen, when it came to you and Boris trying to cook these kippers, what were you looking for as you were going around the kitchen? I mean,
things to cook with.
Yes, fine.
But that was the key thing. Where were these cooking implements?
Okay, and
because there must be there.
Well, I'm going to explain how you cook them, but
all right.
How did you think you needed to cook a kipper? What did Boris think?
Well, I had absolutely no idea how to. He's much more competent than I am in so many things, but particularly when it comes to cooking kippers. He knew that you needed to warm them up. He was looking for a frying pan, I think.
Yes, okay.
And butter he wanted.
Yes, yep. So the key piece of kitchen equipment there was of course the frying pan. Let me let you into a secret. I actually think the kippers are best cooked incredibly simply just in an oven. Shall I show you how to do it?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's do it.
While we're doing it, I think there's
but
one
you've
thing
cheated. You've got a pan already.
Well, I found
we
a pan.
didn't have that. We had to
I
look
looked
for it.
around and I found one.
I
think there's one thing
but
you
would
probably
like a glass of wine?
Well, that's probably something I think you probably can do.
that's
over in a
essential.
bottle. I expect you like your whites and your reds. Are you allowed to go overseas, or is it merely in France that you take your Chardonnay from?
Well, I think one should always remember the great reason for drinking claret is in the last battle of the 100 Years' War, the good people of Bordeaux asked us to go and rescue them from the French. And do you know why this was? We lost it, unfortunately, but it's because the French were putting a higher tax on their wine than we were. And so they wanted to remain English, and therefore to thank them for their loyalty to the crown, I think one should stick to claret, by and large.
Okay, fair enough. Right, before we sip that, let me show you what
You'll show you
do.
this incredibly difficult task. You found the pan in advance. It was a pan you'd prepared earlier.
Yeah. I've also done something which
That's a lot of butter.
Which is also to turn on an oven. Now, I like butter.
Yeah, so do I, but that's a week's ration in the war.
We'll put a big knob of butter on each kipper. Okay? That's all you need to do. All right?
Well, that's it.
Now you're going to do the next part, right? Which is you don't need the oven glove. All right?
No, because it's cold at the moment. Even I know that.
Exactly.
That's stupid.
There's an oven here.
Oh yes.
Right, which I've already set to about 180. Right?
Yes.
So all I need you to do, Jacob, to show the great skill that you've got, is to put the kippers in the oven. Would you like to do that?
All right. So I better open the oven, hadn't I? Top or bottom?
We'll put it in the middle.
In the middle. And there we go.
There we go. Close the oven door.
Yes.
And in 10 minutes' time, we should have a kipper. Chin chin.
Are you kipper? You're very good health.
Well, I make that 10 minutes, Jacob. So would you like to do the honours and take out the kippers?
I would normally defer to a master chef, but all right, I will have a go. This seems to be a left-handed glove, but perhaps it's multi-handed. Sizzling away. Very splendid.
There you have it.
Some fine kippers, and that's all you have to do?
That's all you have to do.
Well, there you are. So now whenever guests come round, I'll be able to give them kippers. I'm not sure how many guests are coming round anymore, but it'll be my own work. It'll taste all the better.
They're very lucky guests because a fine kipper with a glass of white burgundy, who knows, maybe some scrambled eggs, Jacob.
That's getting very technical.
Exactly.
I think that's far too complicated.
Anyway.
Well, the kippers have not died in vain.
Thank you for having me in your
Great
kitchen.
pleasure, as always. Well, thank you. That's all from me. I'm sorry there's been some problem with the sound earlier on. I hope it didn't disrupt the programme too much. Thank you very much to my able assistant, Alfred, who read the mail mogs beautifully. And now it's Professor Daniel Wotton. What's coming up on your show this evening?
Jacob, I could hear you loud and clear, and I have to say, I want a piece of those kippers. It's been a great week, actually, coming from your home, and we are going to miss you the next couple of weeks when you're on your proper holiday, but lovely to see the family and everything. We have a big show on the way tonight, Jacob. Is it correct for Princess Diana's bulimia to be dragged into this new children's book? We will debate that. Plus all the regulars, Calvin Mackenzie, Niall Gardner and Lady Colin Campbell. Oh, and Anne Widdecombe too.
Well, that all sounds as excellent as always. It's coming up after the weather. It's been an absolute pleasure bringing you State of the Nation from God's Own County this week. If you're in the area on Saturday, don't forget the Clutton Flower Show. The gates open at 1 o'clock. I will be opening it as usual at 2 o'clock. As Dan was saying, I'll be off for the next couple of weeks, but I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and as ever, the sun continues to shine in Somerset, and will continue to do so, I'm sure, for the Clutton Flower Show, which will all be at on Saturday. Thank you, and good night.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest broadcast for GB News. I'm Greg Dewhurst. We're going to see increasing risk of showers as we move towards the weekend, but there will be some sunny spells, just turning a little cooler too. If we look at the bigger picture, this area of low pressure moves in another area of low pressure for the weekend, bringing the risk of showers, though not as windy as recent weekends. For this evening, it's been fine end of the day for many, but we do have this area of rain pushing north and eastwards. It could be heavier for a time across Northern Ireland as it crosses into Scotland too. Elsewhere, generally quite a cloudy, warm, muggy night to come. A lot of cloud around, some drizzle over the hills. Temperatures remaining in double figures, 17, 18 degrees as a low for some of us. A bit of a cloudy start to Friday, still some rain across Scotland, heavy at times, pushing away northeastwards, and then slowly through the morning it starts to brighten up. We could see this area of cloud push into southeast England though to give some showery rain for the afternoon. Elsewhere, bright afternoon, sunny spells and scattered showers, turning breezy around western coast, making it feel a little cooler here. Still highs reaching 27 degrees towards East Anglia. And then Saturday, this low approaches us,